Bueno, vamos ahora con nuestro primer conversatorio, cómo ampliar la igualdad de género invirtiendo en la salud de mujeres. Este contará con la participación de Cristina Ljungberg, cofundadora de Case for Hair, y de Pat Mitchell, directora editorial de TEDWomen, productora ejecutiva y curadora. Invertir donde muchos no ven posibilidades de crecimiento podría ser una de las mayores oportunidades filantrópicas y de inversión para abordar la igualdad de género. A través de subvenciones, inversiones, convocatorias y promoción, Cristina Ljungberg, cofundadora de Case for Hair, trabaja por la igualdad de género con el fin de impulsar la financiación en temas claves para la salud de las mujeres, especialmente en la salud menstrual y el placer sexual femenino. Los dejo en compañía de este conversatorio. Bienvenidas, Cristina y Pat Mitchell.
It is such a pleasure to bring women that I admire and have the opportunity to work with all over the world, to bring them to Women Working for the World Forum in Colombia. And this is one such woman. She maybe traveled the furthest to be with us, I'm not sure, but she traveled from Stockholm, Sweden, to join us today. Cristina is an American, by the way, was born in America, I should say, but has spent her life truly working for the world. And I'd like to also begin by saying that you've brought your mother with you. Would you like to introduce her and have her stand and accept our welcome?
Absolutely. Mom?
Mom has a name.
Jane Ann, thank you for being here. I think it's the first time she's seen me in action, so this will be interesting.
Well, all the more reason I'm excited about this interview. And also, Cristina has a wonderful policy as a mother in that she and her husband took her children to different places in the world and lived for several months at a time in the communities, getting to know the country. And Colombia was one of those countries. Why don't you tell us a bit about those months that you spent here before we talk about your work?
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you to the WAMFA Foundation for having me here, because this was an incredible opportunity to come back to Bogota, which was my home for a few months in 2018. I took my 4 sons and my husband on a 1-year learning journey through Latin America with the idea that we could see something different and maybe they would learn Spanish. That didn't quite work out, but it's amazing. It's amazing to be back. I really got goosebumps in the taxi last night, so thank you.
And what we want to talk about today with Cristina is the work that she does, which is amplifying gender equality in one of the most essential ways, which is by investing in the programs and the initiatives that move women forward. And not only does she do that through the philanthropic A Case for Her, which you can go online and find out more about, but she does it across the board with her philanthropic investments, donations, and also with her capital investments, recognizing that if we don't invest in women and girls, if we don't create the opportunities for them to realize their dreams, their full economic potential, if we don't enable them to confront the challenges that are a part of their everyday lives, gender equality will continue to be elusive, and yet we know it's essential to the well-being of the world. And Cristina, in your work, you took on subjects, projects, programs that many others would not. And in making that kind of courageous, bold decision to invest your time and your money in places and programs where others were not. Tell us about those decisions, what led to them, and why you chose the two areas you chose.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to say that, it's been about 15 years of working with the case for her, and I do that in partnership with a co-funder. And so our journey really starts as a conversation between two women trying to figure out how we could pool our capital and our time and our resources and network to make a difference. And I wouldn't say that we necessarily had a lot of capital when we got started, but to think, how can we make that capital the most valuable capital available? And some of those things are to be highly risk tolerant and to fund where the other large sums of capital don't go. And so maybe it's a surprise to some of you in the room, but literally no one invests in funds in menstrual health and sexual health and pleasure. So Wendy and I made a very concerted, intentional decision to be the world's most innovative and effective menstrual health funders. And I can say, I think after the past few years, we definitely are that. We've developed a very interesting portfolio of grant funding and debt and equity all across the world in menstrual health. And surprisingly, we're not really interested in the impact that we're having. We're interested in leveraging it as a learning tool so that we can get as sharp as possible and become effective advocates. And I think we're doing that.
Can you talk a little bit about the specific projects that you've invested in and how they have helped girls all over the world face the challenges that come with menstruation?
Well, I think some of the more obvious ones, a good example would be last week I was actually visiting one of our first investments in a company, a for-profit social enterprise called AfriPads. And AfriPads is based in Uganda, Kampala. And over the past 8 years, we've built a factory, employed 200 women and a few men. And we've manufactured enough cloth reusable menstrual pads this year for over 5 million women and girls. And what's so remarkable about that is that we've also been able to build a very sustainable, successful, profitable business. And so I'm actually very proud about that investment. Some of the maybe less obvious investments that we make are things where we feel like we can unblock some of the barriers to other larger funders getting into the menstrual health space. So we fund things like research into metrics and then the validation of those metrics so that other funders that need to report either to a government or a board or investors can actually measure the impact that they're having. And let's be honest here, counting how many menstrual pads you distribute just isn't good enough. We need to actually measure the impact that having everything that a woman or a girl needs to manage their menstrual health, the impact that that has. We invest in human-centered design. So how do we co-create the solutions that women and girls need to manage their menstruation? We invest in technology. I think a really interesting example of our theory for change is we made a $50,000 investment a couple of years ago in an app called Oki, O-K-Y, and you can all check it out. It's actually available globally. And UNICEF developed this minimum viable product using our small amount of money in Mongolia and in Indonesia. And with that, they went to the Australian government and on the back of that $50,000 investment raised 7 million Australian dollars, which is just incredible.
That is fantastic.
And that's an open source app that anybody can use. Anybody can, at an NGO or a social enterprise, and leverage. So it's like a menstrual tracking app, but also a dictionary of sexual health in your pocket.
What does it actually do? It tracks numbers, but as well gives information to users.
It's basically sex ed in your pocket, and you can use it as a tracking app, so girls can learn how to understand their period and keep track of when it would happen. When you get your period. We actually I don't remember having that, but it's incredible what a simple simple app can do.
And I think when Cristina first moved into this area, people were questioning her, why this specific area, what's the relationship to gender equality? And yet it's so clear that the challenge is that it takes away for girls in terms of going to school and feeling good about themselves and their body, as well as the information you're sharing.
Well, even women in the workforce, and I would say, in my opinion, it's one of the most catalytic cross-cutting areas where one can invest. So if we think about the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, it's never explicitly mentioned, but if you think about achieving our goals in health, education, water and sanitation, gender equality, I would say it's one of the most effective investments you can make.
And that's one of the great things about a forum like this, is you get to hear how each of us in our own ways and the own programs that we're involved in, it's a piece of a very big puzzle, and each of them takes us a step further along the way. Along with these, what many people might have considered risky or stigmatized
Absolutely.
investments, you also have taken your investment capital and invested in women-owned and women-led enterprises. Less than 2%, is that right? Less than 2%
Unfortunately.
of the world's capital is invested in women-led companies and enterprises. You are changing that. Tell us how.
Well, my partner and I, we started making quite a few for-profit investments and dialing it up and doing more and more investing actually outside of the foundation, basically to get exposure and, like I mentioned, to get smarter on these issues. And it just hit us. If we really want to be part of changing at scale the kinds of companies and the kinds of goods and services that we have access to, then we need to think about why it's only 2% of venture capital that's going to women-founded, women-led businesses. And that's not just femtech, that's all businesses. And we realized that, and I think others realized before us, I think you're the one that told me that finance was the final frontier, Pat.
We have a saying we deeply believe: finance is the final frontier of feminism.
But it is. So we realized the only way to really change that is to help support women writing bigger checks. So Wendy and I decided to get really bold and courageous about writing bigger checks even for women and girls outside of our foundation. And we wanted to move up the investment chain. Unless we have venture capitalists and investors writing large checks for women and girls, we're just not going to get there. So we actually decided to really focus on only increasing our exposure to the deal flow through venture capital funds. And now we have a whole slate of VC funds where we've put capital there that invest in, for instance, there's one called Rhea Ventures, which I absolutely love. They only invest in innovative contraceptives for men and women. Or Coyote Ventures, only femtech. There's a whole list. And so I'm super committed to that, except for when some really exciting deals come along, like seaweed tampons. I hope we can talk a little bit about climate.
Yes, absolutely, the connection to climate.
One of the other things that we've been thinking about is, although I really believe that the case for her is an investment in the climate crisis, as we know, investing in women and girls is one of the biggest levers for addressing climate change, like highlighted from Project Drawdown, one of the world's greatest provider of solutions. So I'm trying to figure out how am I going to go even deeper on that and apply a climate lens across the case for her. So I'm making investments like seaweed tampons.
Yes?
And
Seaweed tampons.
kelp. It's going to be amazing, actually.
And it is also has an environmental impact.
Absolutely.
All of your investments are interesting examples, and which is why it's such a good best practices for us to share today. Interesting, they all look at the intersectionality of an issue. You don't take one women's health issue and put it over here, climate issue and put it over here, economic empowerment over here. You're actually investing in the companies that see the intersectionality. And how do you make those decisions?
Well, I would say when we think about adding projects and investments to the portfolio, it's really about asking the question if those specific investments will inform everything else that's in there. And when it comes down to it, I believe that, in my experience at least, there's been nothing more powerful on this journey than our voices. So I really do believe that the case for her and the investment that we make are an investment in my co-funder and myself to be stronger advocates. So when we make those decisions, I think they're all intersectional and they're all informing the question, how can we get these key women's health issues that are extremely and massively underfunded on the global health agenda? So I think that's what I'm continuously thinking about if I'm going to make an investment.
And it's also important that the case for her is making the case that these investments are good investments too.
Absolutely. It's been over 10 years that we've been investing in menstrual health and about 5 that we've been investing in sexual health and pleasure. And it's time to really be dragging out the evidence and presenting it from these investments. So for instance, AfroPads is a wonderful example that I gave at the beginning, the return on that investment. And the reason that I need that evidence is that my sole purpose is to de-risk the space for the larger scale funders. So for instance, in Sweden, I would want to see SIDA, our development agency, move more funding, or other larger foundations. So what evidence can I provide that is going to de-risk these key women's health issues that literally affect half the planet that no one invests in?
Well, we're happy that you're investing in them, Cristina, but you're also investing in something else that, again, might be a bit surprising when one looks at your portfolio of philanthropic and capital investments. You're also investing in film, and documentaries in particular. Let's share with us how that fits into the overall gender equity proposal and purpose of your work.
Well, as I mentioned before, I think our voices and even more narrative and storytelling is one of the most powerful tools at scale. So I got involved with documentary maybe about 15 years ago when a friend of mine asked me to help her make a film about her brother and the genocide in Darfur. And that basically just rocked my world. So since then, I've invested or financed, also together with a co-funder and a female partner, about 50 films, which sounds crazy saying that. And many of them are not about women and girls. They're just, documentary is so important, these stories and the connections that they create. But when I find a film that really intersects with the work at the Case for Her, it's magic. So, for instance, we funded a film a few years ago called The Dilemma of Desire, basically telling the story of how women haven't been present in those conversations. And I don't think the clitoris was in the medical books until the 1980s, which is kind of a surprise. Other films like India's Daughter a few years ago about the December 2012 gang rape case in Mumbai.
I wanted you to
Not
mention
sure.
a couple of the titles because I think actually these films are available on global streaming platforms, and people, I'm sure, might be interested in seeing them. So The Devil Rode on Horseback is the film about Rwanda. What are some of the others mentioned, the ones that have had the greatest reach and impact?
Well, when it comes to taking the planet more plant-based, there was a film called The Game Changers. I would bet that some people in this room have seen that. I don't know how many people blame me for becoming plant-based and vegan. It's probably the greatest impact that we can have on the climate question. Citizen 4 about Edward Snowden. Oh my gosh, Pat, it's such a long list.
Just those four, by the way, to give you some context from the film world, just those four are among the most important, impactful, award-winning documentaries that have been made in the last 10 years. And it's Cristina and other women like her who step up to fund these projects that others are more reluctant to fund. So I want to say on behalf of all narrative storytellers, thank you for that.
Thank you.
So what else would you like this audience to know about your work? They may be thinking about their own investments or thinking about projects they want people to invest in. And one of the toughest things for women and men too, but I find particularly we have a hard time asking for money. We have a hard time making the case, as it were, for the work we're doing. What's the most effective way to do that, you as a funder?
Well, I think my top number one advice would be to find co-funders and to go on this journey together. One of my favorite things to do is to find an incredible project and put together a group of co-funders so we can go on the learning journey together, and also to remove some of the administration from the project that we're funding. And so maybe I'll give some examples. I would like to say that congratulations to Colombia and the big decision that the country took to decriminalize abortion a few weeks ago. That's huge. Now with 3 of the 4 most populous countries in Latin America, Mexico and Argentina too, I feel so proud for you. I was celebrating in Sweden, and also together with one of the projects that I'm co-funding together with a group of 5 women called Vitala Health. There were a group of us that were quite moved by an article in the New York Times about the situation in Venezuela a few years ago. And we ended up funding a partnership of 2 OBGYNs from Canada that developed an app and a chat bot to support women in Venezuela and beyond in Latin America to have access to self-care and medication abortion. And I'm so proud to share this journey with those 4 other women, to learn together, to challenge each other, and to make sure that in the next stages there's more co-funding available and it's not just myself that's sitting at the table.
This is so Cristina, and the reason that I was so pleased at Kata that we could invite Cristina here today, because there are always these big moments in our path, our learning journey to gender equality. And generally when something big happens, like funding for a very controversial abortion case or film, you'll find Cristina Ljungberg is somewhere in the mix. She is somewhere not only investing her own time, but also bringing other people into the learning journey. And I'd like to add my great positive congratulations to this country for seeing the importance of women's rights and reproductive health. We are very worried about it in our country.
And then maybe I'll say a few words about our second portfolio.
Yes, please do.
Also very controversial, but smart and strategic. So our second portfolio is actually focused on female pleasure. And that might be a surprise. There can't be too many philanthropists that have told you that they're funding sexual pleasure. So I just
can't think of another one, actually.
I just want to present a question for some of you to think about, because I know that I'm going to be able, and I'm already starting to deliver some evidence on this question. But what's the probability that by telling adolescents what they want to know, they might remember what they need to know? And we're probably going to be able to measure a greater uptake of goods and services like access to contraceptives and HIV self-testing if we took a pleasure positive, sex positive approach. And so it was just a few weeks ago, actually, together with the World Health Organization and a wonderful London-based organization called the Pleasure Project, that we published in a scientific journal a review article actually showing that the evidence does exist, that taking a pleasure-positive, sex-positive approach will be the most strategic approach that we can take to sex ed. So I'll put that out there.
Okay. Well, I think you've put several things out here for us to think about, because that's what Cristina does with your philanthropy. You put subjects out there that many, as you say, are risk-averse and step away from, that are stigmatized and yet clearly important for women's health and women's way forward.
Thank you.
Well, I do want to say thank you to you, Cristina, for the bravery, the courage, the risk-taking, and just being present. And I really do believe that that's where it all starts, doesn't it? Where we all step forward, open our eyes, go on the learning journey, which you have gone on with your partners, and which we are going on together today. Thank you, Cristina. I know your mom must be proud of you.
Gracias, Cristina y Pat, por acompañarnos también.